This is the Canon T7i, and it is old. It was released back in 2017, but just because it's old doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. Actually, this was my first legitimate camera, and I used it for a good amount of time, so I kind of know my way around it, and I know that it might be the right camera for you, even now in 2024. I've got a list of some pros and cons for it, but it's important to know that this is going to be sort of a beginner camera. When you're graduating from using your smartphone, which pretty much everybody has, to using a dedicated video camera, this is where you want to go. Now notice I said video. It's because, yes, it's good for photos, but if you're going to go just mainly for photos, you might as well use something like the Canon T7, which is even cheaper, because the Canon T7i is really optimized for video recorders, mainly because of this screen. Talk about that in the pros. The first pro is that this camera is really freaking cheap now, especially if you're buying it on the used market. You can get it for well under $500 normally, and that will usually come with the kit lens. It's difficult to find good cameras around this price point, especially without making some massive concessions, but because this is an older style of camera, this is a true DSLR camera and not a mirrorless camera, there's just a lot of them on the used market, and it is kind of an older technology, which means the price is a lot lower. Speaking of there being a lot of stuff for this camera on the used market, one of my biggest pros for this camera is it uses the EF style of mount from Canon, which, as a lot of photographers know, is, well, used to be the premier lens mount. Canon made some incredible L series lenses for the EF mount, stuff that a lot of professionals are still using today, and it's a very long running mount, which means a lot of those awesome lenses that people are now switching out for the newer RF style for the mirrorless cameras, a lot of those good EF style lenses are now coming onto the used market, and their prices are going drastically down despite the fact that they're still incredible lenses. One of Canon's own closest competitors to the T7i when it comes to the ability of the camera as well as the price is their M50, but the M50 uses their M style mount, which really doesn't have that many good lenses and nothing like the L series that you can find for the EF. Why is this important? Well, having a good lens mount system means that you can buy expensive lenses and put them on your cheaper cameras and then upgrade your cameras down the line, because camera technology changes way faster than lens technology does. So a lens that you buy now is going to be good for 10, 20 years, whereas a camera you buy now is going to be outdated severely in 10 to 20 years. So even if you start on Canon's EF mount with the T7i and buy a bunch of really good EF mount lenses, you can adapt those lenses to the RF mount, which is what I've done with my R6 sitting right here, and the lenses still perform really well. The optical quality is still incredible, so you're really not wasting money or having to switch entire systems. Next up, this camera feels really good in the hand. I've never been a big fan of Sony's very minimalistic style camera. It doesn't feel as good, it takes up less space, but having a camera like this that my fairly big hands can actually wrap around nicely and form to well is important to me, especially when it comes to shooting photos. If I was just doing photos, I don't necessarily even need my R6. I could still comfortably shoot on the T7i. Generally, I've found that it's best to just get what you need, something that will get the job done, and then set aside the rest of that budget to improve your video quality in other areas. And the number one thing that I recommend people invest in after getting a camera like this and you're beginning your YouTube journey is really good high quality music to soundtrack your videos, which is why I've accepted Epidemic Sound as today's video sponsor. Now with Epidemic Sound, you have access to a library of over 40,000 songs and 90,000 sound effects, and all of those songs across all of the genres that they have are super high quality. It's what I use in all of my videos. One of the things that I like most about Epidemic Sound, and this is perfect for you if you're sort of new to YouTube, is they give you a 7-day free trial to see if you like it before ever having to pay. I have a link in the description down below. Might as well check it out, see if you like it. There's so much of YouTube that is really, really complicated and can give you headaches, but with Epidemic Sound, copyright clearing your videos is super easy. You just link your channel on the channel page, then their system takes care of the rest. You never have to worry about copyright again, and you get to use amazing music. When it comes to stepping up the quality of your videos, high quality music and sound effects really cannot be beat, which is why I always recommend Epidemic Sound, my favorite service for that too, all the video creators, new and experienced. And when you're shooting those videos, you kind of need to see what you're doing. That is what I really, really like about the T7i and why I chose to buy it as my first upgrade camera, because this guy has a nice little flip out screen, which is super, super important, especially if you want to do vlogging, but even just for sitting, like stationary, sitting head, shots like this. Like, I need to be able to line up my shot with the monitor. Even though Canon now offers some cameras like I think it's the R100 that might have higher specs in other ways, that camera doesn't come with an articulating screen. That is just so important for content creators. If you end up buying a camera without it, you're just gonna have to buy another camera down the line because you're gonna realize that you really need this. So big pro for the T7i, the flip out screen, and it's rare in this price point. It's very rare. Another thing about this screen that's rare in this price point, it's a touch screen. It's a full touch screen, which makes life so much easier, because if you're coming from your phone, you're used to adjusting everything with the tap of a button or with the tap of your finger on the screen. Having to pull out your camera and cycle through with these little buttons or like a little dial, it's way more of a pain in the butt than you realize. So going from where you probably are to upgrading to this camera, having that touchscreen is a big benefit. And that's not the only reason that the T7i is good for beginners, because along with having kind of beginner camera equipment, you probably have more beginner camera software or computers. The file sizes on like my cinema camera and even my R6 would shock you. I mean, my cinema camera will shoot 256 gigabytes and it'll be 30 minutes of footage. It's ridiculous. You don't have to worry about that with the T7i. If you're at a beginner level, there's no way you're going to be able to edit that sort of footage with the computer that you have. The T7i, you don't have to worry about that at all because it does have super small, manageable file sizes, which comes with a few of the cons that I'm going to talk about, but overall makes the entire process of creating a video so much smoother because your computer's not going to lag, it's not going to crash, and you're not going to pull your hair out like I did for a while. Those are sort of all of my pros for this camera, but of course it's not a perfect camera because then I would be using it. There still are some cons. The most glaring, and the thing that you're probably most curious about if you've looked at the stats, is that this camera only shoots 1080p video, which in today's day and age, you hear 1080p and you think that it's like ancient and all pixelated and terrible, but it's still full HD. A lot of the movies that you watch, DVDs, all of that is in 1080p. What took me a minute to realize as a beginner is that not all resolutions are really built the same. 1080p shot on this camera looks a lot different than 1080p shot on my iPhone, and that's because the sensor size and color science in this camera versus my iPhone is wildly different. Most people watch YouTube on their phones, and you actually can't tell whether your phone is putting out 1080p or 4K. Like, your eyes can't pick it up on such a small screen. This idea that down the road in 2025 and 2026, 2027, nobody's going to be filming in 1080p and nobody's going to be watching anything in 1080p, and 1080p will look like 360p looks to us now, that isn't going to happen. It's just not, because our eyes are the limiting factor there. 1080p simply acts as a bit of a constraint because it stops you from being able to push in like this and still have a high definition video. You can still see me really well, and I've cropped in 4 times. That's crazy. Can't do that with 1080p. So if that ability to crop in is something that's very important for your content, like you want to film long form horizontally and then push in vertically for short content, then you probably do want to shoot in 4K, but for most people, 1080p is just fine. Another thing that keeps those file sizes small but really limits the ability of this camera is it doesn't shoot in any sort of log color profiles, nothing like super cinematic, which again, beginner camera, I wouldn't expect it to, and you're not going to find anything like that within the under $500 budget or even the under $800 budget. But that's just one of the things that makes this image here that you're looking at look really good versus an image that I would shoot on the T7i. Actually, I'll put up this frame shot by the T7i so you can actually see the difference between the R6 and the T7i. The resolution and the color science are not the only thing that is different about this frame, and that's where con number 3 comes in, which is the T7i has a 1.6 times crop, which is pretty substantial. That means whatever your focal length of your lens is, you're gonna have to multiply that by 1.6 times to get what the effective focal length is. Whereas a full frame camera like my R6, when I put a 50mm lens on it, it's shooting at 50mm. If I put the same lens on this camera, it's shooting at 80mm. So that's a big difference. You have to back the camera up a lot more, which makes it a lot harder for vloggers because you need some wide stuff, but you can always just like buy a very, very wide lens to adapt for that 1.6 times crop. That is absolutely every con that I have for this camera, especially when it comes to beginners. I think that if you're in the under $500 budget range, go for the T7i, especially if you want to get into the Canon ecosystem of the EF lenses and all that. There's really no better beginner camera, even now in 2024. At least for content creators, people that want the full hybrid between video and photo. And if you want to check out the camera that I'm shooting on, the Canon R6, you should watch that video over there, which is a full review of it, what I like about it, and why it's just really not a good option, even though I'm using it here in 2024. Thanks for watching.